Hey everyone, welcome back to 996. The Howl Coyotes hockey returns Thursday night at home against the Vegas Golden Knights, who just ended the historic Edmonton Oilers win streak, and we're exactly a month away from the trade deadline, which might be a bit of an underwhelming trade deadline for the Arizona Coyotes. Right now, they're about 5 points out from a playoff spot. They're getting healthier. Hayden and Dumba will be in the lineup Thursday night. Still waiting on Ruzicka. If his immigration papers gets passed through, maybe he makes an appearance on the weekend or next week. But the Coyotes are in a tough spot. They can't really sell, nor do they have a lot of value to sell either way. And to waste some draft picks and talent to buy, to go for a push, seems a bit preemptive, and they're not in the right spot yet to be major buyers. And I also don't want them to be major buyers at this trade deadline. This season's going as expected. We'll see how the push is the next 10 games if this team really wants to make the playoffs. But either way, at the trade deadline, if the Coyotes are in a wild card spot, they're not trading a first round pick for a rental to make that final push into the playoffs. I think just maintain status quo is probably going to be the MO here for the Coyotes. And if anything, we might see some small additions like we saw 2 seasons ago when they got Nathan Smith and Jack McBain at the deadline. Even though they were tanking, they acquired some players who they controlled their future. They liked them, they scouted them, and brought them into their organization. They were about that early 20s, approaching mid 20s age, which Bill Armstrong liked. And even last trade deadline, they acquired Kesselring from the Oilers in exchange for Bukestad. So again, they might just go out and acquire these under-the-radar players, unproven players at the deadline to make the team better in the future, and maybe not immediate right now. Let's look at their selling options. These are the 4 players, but honestly, but I think honestly, there's only one player here that I think they'll sell on and get a pretty good return on if they could find a sucker of a GM, and I think that would be Matt Dumba. I think his contract, $3.9 million, way less than Zucker. He's a UFA. It took him like 30 games to finally get good with the Coyotes. And we don't know whether him being out of the last 3 games was a reason why the Coyotes got embarrassed on that Southeast road trip, but maybe they could make do with Dumba out of the lineup. I know he's a great locker room guy. I'm a bit on the fence whether to trade him or not, but I just think he holds the most value. I think maybe you can get a second round pick for Dumba, and that's a strong maybe. He hasn't really performed well enough, and his value hasn't increased since joining the Coyotes. It's a bit middle of the road, and honestly, seeing how Gostisbehere got us a third round pick last season, maybe the reality is he'll only get you a third round pick, but they could retain. They have one retention spot, I think one retention spot for this deadline, and they'll probably use it if they're going to sell off a player. Zucker, I think it's way too much money. Even if the Coyotes retain 50% and it's like 2.6 million that the Coyotes retain, I don't know what team sees Zucker as value for $2.6 million. Again, maybe you could find a sucker of a GM to take Jason Zucker's contract and play. To be honest, if they traded Zucker, I don't think the Coyotes would even miss a beat. I think one of the trades of Zucker or Dumba, it could be a bit of a conservative sell where, okay, you're out of the playoffs, you really don't think the team's going to make the playoffs with how things go over the next month. You can trade away these pieces and not really tarnish the mood around the team and still give your team a chance to compete every night. I don't think these guys really turn the needle. You could recall some players in their absence. Maybe Ruzicka becomes that Zucker forward that we wanted Zucker to be. You never know, but I think you can sell these 2 players and not kind of take this team off the rails as I think these next 2 players might. And some people, I don't know, some people, maybe one person might think, hey, they should trade Schmaltz at the deadline. That's not going to happen. That's going to derail this team. just tank the morale of this team. He's Clayton Keller's best friend. He's been part of the core for so long. If you are going to trade Nick Schmaltz, it's going to happen in the summer. It's not going to happen at the trade deadline where the Coyotes are sort of competing and almost there. I mean, trading Schmaltz, that would just send a signal like, yeah, you guys aren't making the playoffs, and they'd probably tank the rest of the season due to how upset it might make the players and the team if that trade happens. So we go to Kerfoot. I think Kerfoot is like the best value the Coyotes have, and I don't want them to trade Kerfoot, but I got to be unbiased here and look at the value of who's on this Coyotes team that can fetch them a good return. I think any playoff team would love a versatile player in Kerfoot, playing center, wing, could play on the first line, second line, fourth line, plays on a PK, power play. He holds a lot of value. I could see him fetching a second round pick. There's no chance anyone on this board or roster, except for Keller, Michelli, maybe let's not even include them in this video, but I don't think there's any available player on the Coyotes roster that would fetch a first round pick. At most a second round pick, and I think that would only be Kerfoot. He also has 2 more years and also has a modified no trade clause for 10 teams, so he controls his future as well. And if I'm honest, I would want them to hold on to Kerfoot. We'll get to the reasons there. How many more draft picks do you really need? And then we go to Vejmelka. A lot of talk about Vejmelka. I really don't think the value is there this year. I don't think you're really getting a lot for Vejmelka currently. I think his better days are behind him. He could rebound, but I think maybe the Coyotes will just hold on to him for his 1 more year and then make that decision next trade deadline whether to move on from him. Right now, I don't know who would really trade for Vejmelka. Some of the teams I put down, the Avalanche, I could see that being a very interesting trade partner, and I could see the Avalanche giving a second for Vejmelka. The last time they got an Arizona Coyote goalie was Darcy Kemper, and they won the cup. Their backup option is like not present. They're trying out a new American Hockey League goalie for the backup of Georgiev. They just put Prosvetov on waivers, who cleared waivers. So they're looking for a backup goalie. Along with Tampa Bay, they have Jonas Johansson as their backup goalie. Edmonton, they have Picard as their backup option as well. Like, Vejmelka's better than those names I mentioned as those teams' backups. And maybe LA too. Maybe they want to give a push. They see the Coyotes a lot. Maybe they could think, Vejmelka on our defensive structure could be good and is worth a second round pick over Copley. The reason why I'm mentioning these backup goalies is because we need a goalie in return. That's why I don't think a Vejmelka trade would happen, because we have no other options for goalies. We would have to steal Matt Vialta, who's playing amazing for the Tucson Roadrunners, who are battling for first place in their division in the American Hockey League. We would have to steal Vialta for a full month of hockey to back up Ingram, and then you have to play Ingram basically for the rest of the season if you're in a sort of pseudo playoff push. So that's why I really don't think a Vejmelka trade would happen, but it could. These teams, like I mentioned and I listed, they're kind of desperate. They're not confident in their backup roles, so it could happen. He is pretty cheap, even if the Coyotes retain. That's really cheap. That's like $1.35 million for a team's new backup for the playoffs. So it could happen, but we need one of those goalies in return. Picard, Johansson, who else? Phoenix Copley, who I've always wanted to be on the Coyotes. We would need a goalie back just to help Ingram get some rest and play some games down the stretch. Here's our list of UFAs, which is why the Coyotes don't have many options to sell. It's a massive drop-off from Zucker, and Travis Boyd has a season-ending injury that happened in November. Dermott, Stetcher, Brown, I'm not even sure it's worth it to get a 6th-round pick for those guys. Might as well just hold on to them. Especially if you trade Dumba out, then you would need NHL defenseman to fill his spot if you're not getting a defenseman back in return. And O'Brien, we only have 38 more games of Liam O'Brien, so I think we could all celebrate when that last game happens. these are some of the players. I was looking through some tanked teams who the Coyotes might be interested in. I've always had my eye on Texier on the Columbus Blue Jackets. He's pretty cheap. He's an expiring RFA, so the Coyotes control his future, and he's 24 years old. Another versatile winger who could play center and wing. He's a hard worker. I think if Columbus is selling, it's a disastrous season for them. Maybe they would give up a good young guy to the Coyotes and just make him even more deeper for this season. It'll be like a mini push of a buy, and even for the seasons after, it's good to have a player like that in your lineup. Just bolster that fourth and third line and gives you some options in case of injuries, which we saw all season this year. So maybe next season you need even more depth just in case, Boyd, Hayden, Dumba, Zucker, they get injured and what have you. And then defensemen, if you're going to move out Dumba, maybe they need a defenseman to go buy, a cheap defenseman that they control the future a bit of. I don't think the Coyotes are ever going to go out this trade deadline and get a guy who's expiring and is going to move from the Coyotes in a month anyways when the Coyotes don't make the playoffs. I got Jake Bean, $2.3 million, maybe a bit rich, but he's an RFA. Maybe the pro scouts of the Coyotes like him. He's also on the Columbus Blue Jackets. Connor Clifton on Buffalo. I would have liked him to be signed by Arizona in the offseason, but he signed with Buffalo. Buffalo's having a disastrous season as well. And we got 2 years plus the rest of the year at $3.3 million. It's a bit rich again, but cheaper than Matt Dumba's contract. And then this would be a pipe dream. Furher Vari on the Washington Capitals. Again, the Capitals probably not going to make the playoffs. Looking towards the future of a soft rebuild. Maybe you give them one of these second-round picks and get a good defenseman for 2 years and a little push for this year. That could be a pretty good trade. I think the Capitals, they like this player. He's a valued player, but a Coyotes second-round pick, it could be pretty high in the draft, and a team that doesn't really know where to go towards their future, that could be a very valuable asset. And then the Coyotes get a good defenseman. He's 24 years old as well. He could be in the mix for the next 2 years, part of the defensive core as well. So let's get into the draft picks. They have so many draft picks, which is why this trade deadline is a bit weird. How many more do you even need? And when does it become futile to have so many draft picks? They got 13 picks this summer, 11 next year, and 26 the year after. Remember last year we traded Gostisbehere for a 2026 third-round pick, so that was 3 years out. If they do trade, I think maybe they grab some second-round, third-round picks for 2027 and start focusing on that draft year. By that time, you're competing for the playoffs consistently. You got a good team, and you have draft picks in your back pocket. That's the way Bill Armstrong has been moving forward. Those trades for 2026 picks are going to start coming to fruition, and you already have 3 of them in 3 years from now. So that's why I love this Bill Armstrong rebuild. The team gets better on the ice, and they still accumulate draft picks to decide to pick more players and fill up the roster for the Tucson Roadrunners, or use those picks to grab value assets that are NHL ready now. It just gives you a lot more options instead of just putting all your bets onto one guy like Hayden and Dylan Strome, like John Shaka had to deal with during his tenure. So I think that's it. I don't think it's going to be a lot entertaining as a Coyotes fan from their perspective. Don't expect big moves. And if anything, they're going to get draft picks for like 2027 if they even go that route. And unfortunately, Zucker hasn't played so well that teams are going to be in dire need of Jason Zucker at $5.3 million. And Dumba, he's cheaper. Maybe a team sees something in him and the Coyotes can move on from Dumba. Because I really don't think they're going to re-sign either of them this summer and just move on. And really, the Coyotes don't have any expiring contracts that are valuable and sought after by other teams around the league. So that's it for me. Thank you for watching. If you like what you see, spread the word. And as always, thank you for your support.